Good morning, Blue Jay friends, and thanks for being here. This is Blue Jays vs. Them, and I'm your host, Jerry Schwinnard. If you're a returning listener, or better yet, have subscribed to the podcast on whichever podcast provider you use, thank you and welcome back. If you're new and you just stumbled across this podcast, thanks for joining me. This is the third episode of Blue Jays vs. Them, Spring Training Edition. If you're a first-time listener, welcome to the show. I'm not sure how much value there is in listening to the first two episodes, but you're welcome to listen to them on the podcast provider you're listening to. Well, the first week of spring training games is in the books. Have you been watching any of the games? Are there any listeners actually in Dunedin? Please let me know if you're down there or planning a trip to go down. I know spring training usually means nothing for the regular season, but has there anything you've seen so far that excites you, or perhaps a little that has concerned you? There was a problem with the website, and the domain host has corrected the issue. The website is www.bluejaysversusthem.ca. That's bluejaysvsthem.ca. Now that the site is up and running, I hope you'll leave questions and comments on the site. You can always find me on Facebook at Jerry Schwinnard, that's JerryChouinard. If you send me a friend request, I suggest you message me that you're a listener of the podcast so I know you're not just a random person fishing. You can also find me on Twitter at Jerry_Schwinnard. That's at Jerry_Chouinard. Now, on with the episode. Here are a few things we'll cover in this episode. We'll do a recap from last week, expand on a segment introduced last week, stats for pitchers and batters. 2023 regular season giveaway promos were announced. Something I should have touched on last week are the 3 new rule changes, so we'll take a look at them. We'll recap the scores and plays from the first week of spring training. A look at the week ahead in Grapefruit schedule for the Jays and the broadcast schedules. Next week's episode, and we'll finish off with closing remarks. Last week's episode was just over 16 minutes, so it seems once I get talking I can stretch things out to nearly 20 minutes. I also went over some of the roster acquisitions and prospects invited to the camp. And yes, I butchered a couple of their names. My apologies for that. As the preseason progresses, I'll learn their proper pronunciation. I also introduced a segment explaining some baseball stats, with one pitcher and one batter. I'd like to continue with that here. Although you're listening to a podcast about baseball, specifically the Blue Jays, you might not be completely sure of what some of the baseball stats are, or what they mean, or even how they're calculated. Heck, there's some I'm not even sure about. I never intended for the show to delve too deep into player stats. Other podcasters will probably cover this much better than I would. With that said, it's almost inevitable not to touch on it a little. Last week I talked about the ERA for a pitcher. In doing so, I mentioned that it does not include unearned runs. Well, what's an unearned run? This is going to lead down a rabbit hole and might introduce a new segment involving baseball terminology. But as defined by the MLB.com, the definition of an unearned run is a run that is scored by an error or a passed ball. See where I'm going here? It's hard to define the stats without defining baseball terminology. Let me know if you want me to go into some terminology, and I'll be happy to add that as a segment. Wins and losses, a basic stat, but not completely without explanation. For a starting pitcher to earn a win, they must complete 5 innings and leave with their team in the lead, or be the pitcher of record when the team takes the lead and doesn't relinquish it. For example, a starting pitcher completes 5 innings pitched with the score tied. If that team takes the lead in the next half inning, they would be the pitcher of record and earn the win, so long as your opponent doesn't tie the game or take the lead. Should the opposing team tie the game, whichever pitcher going forward is the pitcher of record without a lead change or tie will earn the win, and the starting pitcher will earn a no decision for their start. A loss is earned on the same principle, with one exception. A losing pitcher does not have to pitch into the 5th inning to be considered the pitcher of record. As long as their team never ties or takes the lead, they'll earn the loss. Last week, I covered batting averages and also touched on what does and doesn't constitute an official at-bat. Another batting stat is the OBP, or on-base percentage. It refers to the percentage of times a batter reaches the base per plate appearance, whether they hit, walk, or are hit by the pitch. It does not include if they reach base by way of an error, a drop ball on a third strike, or a fielder's choice. Once again, we may need to discuss baseball terminology. Not that anyone will want to figure out a player's OBP, but there is a mathematical formula. Alright, get out your pens and papers. The formula is hits plus walks, which is based on balls, plus hits by pitch. Then you divide that number by the number of at-bats, plus walks, plus hits by pitch, and sac flies, basically your plate appearances. Before we go into a recap of last week's games, I think we need to discuss the 3 new rule changes being incorporated starting this season. The first and easiest is the larger bases. Starting this year, the bases will go from 15 inches square to 18 inches square. Naturally, that will decrease the distance from one base to the next, but only by a few inches. According to MLB, the distance between home plate and first base and third base and home will be only reduced by 3 inches, while the distance between first and second and third will be reduced by 4.5 inches. In theory, this should inspire more of a running game, which, as you might remember, in my first spring training episode, I mentioned that John Schneider might be looking to incorporate more of a running game to help manufacture runs. The next change will be the elimination of the shift. I believe it's officially called defense shift limits. Starting the season, until the pitch is thrown, there must be 2 infield defenders on either side of second base and no further than the outer limits of the infield. This also eliminates defensive positioning of a 4th player in the outfield. However, the outfielders can be positioned as shallow as they want. In other words, you could position an outfielder in the infield. If the infielders are not aligned properly at the time of the pitch, the offensive team may opt for an automatic ball call or the result of the play. I'm not even sure what that last part might mean, but I'm sure we'll learn as the preseason plays itself out. And lastly, the pitch clock. This one may take some getting used to, and it's already had an effect on a game. There's a 30-second timer between batters. Between pitches, with no runners on base, pitchers will have 15 seconds to start their pitching motion. They're given an extra 5 seconds with runners on base. Within that 15 seconds or 20-second timer, batters are required to be in the batter's box and in position to hit by the 8-second mark. The umpire will assess an automatic strike if a batter is not in position. If the pitcher is not ready to start the windup in the allotted time, an automatic ball will be assessed. Timeouts can still be requested and granted, but unlike years past, don't expect the last-second timeout reprieve. The time between batters can be extended at the umpire's discretion. Plays involving the catcher, for instance, will be given time to gather their gear and get into position. The other change is the number of times pitchers can attempt pickoffs or steps off the rubber. Only 2 unsuccessful attempts will be allowed. The 3rd unsuccessful attempt will result in the pitchers being assessed a balk, and the runners will move up a base. Look for more play sets of the catcher throwing behind the runners at first. The other changes in mound visits. I think I'll save that for next week. I'm sorry I didn't cover these changes last week, and we could be talking about how you guys might feel about them, or how they've affected the game so far. Promo nights have been announced for the 2023 season. I will remind everyone of the giveaway nights throughout the season. All giveaways will be for the first 15,000 fans through the gates. So far they include Wednesday, April 12th will be Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Gold Glove Bobblehead. On Monday, April 24th will be Romano and Jensen Handshake Bobblehead. A George Springer New Blue replica jersey giveaway will be Friday, April 28th. Wednesday, May 31st will be Bow Bundle Day with a white replica jersey and headband. On June 7th, the first 15,000 fans will receive an MLB ball cap. Saturday, June 24th will be Cricket Day at the ballpark. Fans will receive a Blue Jays replica cricket jersey. On June 28th, a Kevin Gausman Splitter blue-white replica jersey. Saturday, July 15th is the Chappie Culture giveaway, a replica Chappie Couture jersey. On Wednesday, July 19th, fans will receive a Blue Jays We're Home welcome mat. Wednesday, August 2nd will be Chris Bassett Camo Night. Fans will receive a Chris Bassett camouflage t-shirt. On Wednesday, August 16th, a Vladdy Jr. blue replica jersey. And finally, a Jose Barrios bobblehead on September 15th. The Blue Jays start the preseason schedule on the road against the Pittsburgh Pirates at Lecom Park last Saturday. I'm not going to give the entire box score and all the scoring plays, but here are some of the notables. Toronto's starting pitcher was Yusei Kikuchi. I know it's a small sample size, but he looked like a better version of himself. He pitched in 2 innings, gave up 1 hit, and struck out 5. Overall, he threw 33 pitches, 20 of them for strikes. Trent Thornton earned the win with 1 inning pitched, and while he struck out 1, he also gave up a base on balls. He threw 18 pitches for 13 strikes. Offensive highlights: Toronto went deep for 3 home runs. Vladdy hit a 2 home run in the 4th, and Addison Barger followed with a solo home run in the next at bat. Santiago Espinal went deep in the 5th with 1 on and 2 outs. He hit a single in his other at bat, going 2 for 2. Otto Lopez led off the 3rd with a triple and scored the game's first run on a sac fly from Nathan Lucas. Unfortunately, in the bottom of the inning, Zach Thompson gave up a grand slam and only managed to pitch 2/3 of an inning. Jimmy Burnett was called in from the pen and struck out his only batter to close out the inning. The final score after 9 innings, Toronto had 9 runs, 13 hits, and 1 error. Pittsburgh, 7 runs, 7 hits, and 2 errors. Sunday, they hosted a split squad Yankees team. Tim Meza got the start. He was also straddled with a loss. In 1 inning of work, he surrendered 3 hits and a run. Jordan Romano came in for the 2nd inning and gave up a double. He also started a play that erased that runner, throwing to second, and the runner was tagged out trying to advance to third. He gave up a base on balls and struck out a batter to end the inning. Nate Pearson gave up 2 hits and struck out 3, but he walked 2 and gave up an earned run. Toronto used 6 more pitchers to finish off the next 6 innings. Offensively, the Jays had home runs from LJ Talley with 2 on in the 5th, who came in to replace Whit Merrifield. Vladdy went deep for the 2nd home run of spring training with 1 on in the 5th, which was the extent of our offensive output. Merrifield led off the game for Toronto with a double. He also walked and was caught stealing in his next at bat. Also hitting doubles were Addison Berger, Orelvis Martinez. Calvin Biggio had 2 hits. 5 runners were left on base. The final score was 9 runs, 16 hits, and no errors for the Yankees, and 5 runs, 8 hits, and no errors for Toronto. On Monday, Toronto played the Atlanta Braves in Cool Today Park in Northport. With no radio or TV, the box score showed Drew Hutchinson started and pitched 2 complete innings. Hutch gave up 5 hits, including a run-scoring double after a base on balls. With 1 strikeout, he allowed 2 earned runs. Trevor Richards allowed 3 hits, was charged with 3 runs, 2 earned, struck out 1, and walked 1. Zach Pop's line looked good. No runs, 1 base on balls, and 2 strikeouts. Our offense was shut out with only 6 hits and 5 runners left on base. Final score, Toronto no runs, 6 hits and 2 errors. Atlanta scored 7 runs on 13 hits and no errors. On Tuesday, the Jays finished off the month of February with a split squad day, hosting the Detroit Tigers while the other squad played the Phillies at Baycare Ballpark in Clearwater. New Jays Chris Bassett and Eric Swanson got their first grapefruit action against the Tigers. Bassett got the start and pitched 2 innings, giving up a base on balls, 2 hits, and allowing 1 earned run. Swanson came out of the bullpen to start the 4th inning, giving up a walk and a single. Anthony Bass came in the 5th inning, striking out the side. The most anticipated pitcher of the game came in the 6th inning when top prospect Ricky Tiedemann took the mound. Efficiently striking out 2 and including a groundout, I must say the 20-year-old did look impressive. George Springer also made his grapefruit debut for 2023 with a hit, a base on balls, and a run scored. A couple defensive highlights came in the 1st, with Calvin Biggio catching a fly ball in right and doubling up the runner on 1st to end the inning. Then in the 3rd inning, a ground ball to 3rd, Chapman deep up the line throws out the runner at 1st. Guerrero went down to the splits to record the 3rd out. The final score, Tigers 4 with 8 hits and 1 error, and the Jays 6 runs, 11 hits, and 1 error. Meanwhile, in Clearwater, the other squad faced the Phillies. Jose Barrios got his first action this spring, getting the start and pitching 2 innings. Barrios only allowed 2 hits, 1 base on balls, and struck out 2. Thomas Hatch didn't fare very well, going only 2/3 of an inning and giving up 5 runs, all earned. Offensively, the Jays didn't fare very well either. Right fielder Zach Britton hit a solo home run in the 6th inning for the Jays' first run. Sebastian Espino scored our 2nd run in the 8th inning with a solo home run of his own. The final score, Blue Jays 2 runs off 6 hits with no errors. Phillies scored 7 runs with 11 hits and no errors. On Wednesday, March 1st, the Jays were at the Ed Smith Stadium in Sarasota to play the Baltimore Orioles. Yusei Kikuchi got his second start, going 2 innings, striking out 2, allowing 1 walk with no hits and no runs. Zach Thompson also pitched 2 innings, striking out the side in the third. He didn't allow a hit or a walk, earning the win after the offense scored in the top of the 4th. Leo Jimenez scored off a Rob Brantley double in the 4th, and in the 8th, Phil Clark hit a solo home run to left center field. The final score was Toronto 2 runs off 9 hits with 1 error, and the Orioles 1 run on 2 hits and 1 error. The Jays finish off their first week of spring training with a 3-3 record. Later today, at least at the time this episode is scheduled to be published, you might be listening afterwards, the Jays will face the Split Squad Pirates team at 1 p.m. As this game is played at TD Ballpark, it will be available on Sportsnet and Sportsnet Now. Over the weekend, the Jays will host the Rays on Friday at TD Ballpark in Dunedin. This game is also on Sportsnet and Sportsnet Now. On Saturday, the Jays will get their second look at the Detroit Tigers when they travel to Lakeland for a game at Publix Field at Joker Merchant Stadium. Seriously? That's the name of the stadium? Then on Sunday, the Jays will host the Phillies at TD Ballpark for a 107 game. You'll be able to watch this game on Sportsnet. The Jays will have the day off on Monday, but will be right back at it when they go to Bradenton to face the Pirates at Lecom Park on Tuesday. On Wednesday, March 8th, the Jays will host the Minnesota Twins. That game will also be available on Sportsnet. Next Thursday, the Jays will have a split squad day. One game will be played at Tropicana Field to face the Rays, while the other will be in Dunedin hosting the Atlanta Braves at TD Ballpark. That should do it for this week's episode of Blue Jays vs. Them. I want to thank you for spending a little bit of your time with me and listening to me prattle on about the Blue Jays. I hope you'll join me next week. If there are any questions or comments, you can leave them on the website right below the episode. Or you can ask me on social media if the links are on the website. You can find me on Facebook at Jerry Chouinard, that's Jerry with a J, and on Twitter at Jerry_Chouinard, that's JERRY_CHOUINARD. Next week, we'll continue with our stats definition segment, recap the week that was, and any player news as teams might be starting to whittle down their rosters. A look ahead at the third week of spring training. I will still include this comment and request here until I know how it applies to podcasting. Many YouTubers I follow will ask viewers to like, comment, and subscribe and share their content. Since you can now find this podcast almost everywhere podcasts are available, I have learned that if you're listening through a podcast app, you can rate the episode or the podcast. So please, give the podcast a rating. And please be kind. If you came across this podcast on Twitter, please like, reply, and retweet. And on Facebook, please leave a reaction, comment, and share. As always, I've been your humble host, Jerry Chouinard, and you've been listening to Blue Jays vs. Them. Once again, I want to thank you for spending your time with me, and I hope you'll join me again next week. Until then, take care of yourself, take care of your loved ones, and have a wonderful rest of the day. And let's go, Blue Jays, let's go. Bye-bye.